But it's something I gotta tell you. I don't mean to be rude, but I gotta know when you gon' be. You gon' be my girl. Always clinging round, you know now. So baby, tell me where I stand.
So you know that all of us grew up in the BVI. So I knew Threcio, but I got to know him. It would have been around 2005, 2006, just after I graduated from high school. We attended the same church, the New Life Baptist Church, and he was the drummer there. And at that time, the youth ran the church in that we did everything. It was speech choir and then dance and jabez, and we lived in church. And so I remember one Sunday after church, he came up to say hello, and I was like, hey, cool, you know, I was just being his friend. And then I realized, oh, okay, he wants to be more than my friend. And so, it's like, okay, let's talk about it. But yeah, that's how we met. And during that time, he was away to school and I was here at HLSCC. So we did that whole long distance thing, lived on Skype, emailed, and looked forward to breaks. Christmas break, summer break. That's what we looked forward to. But yeah, those were good times. And I remember during that whole courting period where I remember one day God was like, he's gonna be your husband. And I was like, okay, God, hold on, what are you doing? He just not my type. What did I know about what my type was, right? But God knew. I remember when things wouldn't always look a good way in that, okay, this is working out, and then I would be like, okay, God, you said so. Let's see how it goes. So yeah, that's how we met. The truth of the matter is that in his mind, and that's how Threcio was. When he made up in his mind that it was going to be something, it was going to be something. So one summer, when he came home, he introduced me to his grandma as his girlfriend. I hadn't said yes or anything like that. But that's what it was, and then I ultimately accepted that that's where in his mind, that's what it was going to be, and that's what it was.
Amen. Amen. Wow.
It was the little things. It's always the little things. And he was able to be away and still make me feel seen, heard, understood. And that was big, You could be with people in a room and still feel alone. And so he did a good job at that. And so I ultimately fell in love with him, and the rest is history.
But I don't have to do. If you let your mouth, let out your mouth and say hello to your father. Right, but I can think my father is sleeping in the grave.
So I remember calling home from school to say that I was pregnant. I was a junior biology student, and I called home to say that I was pregnant, and I thought that he had misunderstood me because he was very excited about that. Came home for summer. I believe that logically everybody was like, okay, you're pregnant, you need to have this baby. But I was like, I have things to do. So I went back to school. He wasn't so much in agreement with that. He wanted me to focus. But I went back, and it was not easy being in another country, away from the things that but I had a good support system. And I had Tishel in September. She was due in October, so in my mind I had time, and I had biochemistry lab to do. But she was ready to come, and I remember being in labor and calling to say, we're gonna have to reshuffle some things because it's happening. And he made the day trip from Tortola to Texas, getting there, being picked up from the airport just in time to arrive at the hospital, and she wasn't born more than 20 to 30 minutes after he came. So it's like from then, Tishel was a daddy girl. She was just waiting on her daddy to get there. And I remember us laughing because after you're traveling all day, he's hungry. So my friend Tisha taking him to Whataburger to get something to eat, and I'm like, I ate Whataburger, I haven't eaten all day. She coming. Let's go. So it was, we laughed at that. And then he made it in time. She was born. And she was the apple of his eye. He did what he did for her. He was focused on being who he was and accomplishing certain things for her. And Threcio always wanted to get married. I was the hold up about, I have to focus on school. And when I was finished with school, I was like, I have to come home. I have to get a job. I need stability. If only life worked out the way that we planned it. It was always a yes for me, just not no. Give us some time to get some things in place. And I remember when he was diagnosed, and there were voices, of course, people thinking that, girl, are you sure this is what you want to do? And I was like, well, I'm going to be there anyway. So, when he asked that final time, I was like, life is short. Obviously, this is what we're doing. We love each other. Let's get married. We should have been married on January 5th, 2013. Days before that, he had gotten some results, and it was like, okay, we need to rush off to get. And then he said, what, I've been here for a couple of months. Well, what is that extra couple of days going to do? Like, we need to get married. I'm going before we get married. And then he was like, the agreement was, I'll go if she's coming with me. And that was always his mindset, if she's coming with me, we could go. So, of course, I went with him. We flew over to Panama, and that's where his medical care would have begun. I was down there for about 2 weeks with him, and then came back home because work and motherhood and all of those things. And he called and he was like, I coming home, and when I come home, let's do this thing. And I was like, okay. So he came home literally. We got married. He was here for like a week or two and was gone again to do chemo. So that's where we were in that journey. Focusing on ensuring that he was well mentally so that physically he could go through what he needed to go through. And I loved him. So I wouldn't have things any other way. What I would say is that if I could go back and do life over again, I would have married him before. Just so that, yeah, I would have. Things didn't need to work out or make a whole lot of sense. That's what I would do differently.
So you could have more time?
More time, for sure. If nothing else, more time. It changed my outlook, and for sure, either of us, if he could tell you, he would tell you we didn't get married thinking that, he's going to die. We were married, loving each other, enjoying life together, having those moments, laughing at everything going through his treatment. Everything was a joke for us. I don't know. And thank God for the ability to just laugh at everything because it was a lot. I remember one doctor's visit checking up, and the doctor was like, so based on what we see, we need to start another round of chemo. And he was like, well, we're going on a cruise. When I come back, we can talk about that, but we're going on vacation. And so just trying to find balance in the midst of, because in his mind, God will work it out. However, yes, the doctors have the wisdom too, but God has the ultimate say. Let me focus on living. I am not focusing on dying. We were happy in the midst of what we were going through and trusting that God ultimately knew and had a plan, and that's what kept us. Trusting God, praying that God have your way. This is what we would want, but God have your way. And that's faith. That's what kept us. He had finished his chemo, and we were doing like I don't remember whether it was a 3-month or a 6-month checkup. You needed to do your checkup, so we traveled for that. And literally the day before we were to come back, and that's how I know, because literally the night before we were supposed to travel, because he had seen the doctor, and the doctor was like, you have some nodules on the lungs and we're going to do some radiotherapy to treat that. It was early November, so after Thanksgiving, that was what the doctors had said. Go home, and after Thanksgiving, we'll work on scheduling you in. But that never came. We had done the doctor visit, the doctor trip. We were in the hotel room. I remember that day he complained about having some pain. He was having pain, and that was normal for him. You know, the body's going through. And so I just kept trying to keep it positive. And I was like, you're going to be all right, man. And he had lots of medicine. So I was like, try this, you know. And he did try taking something. And we were just winding down at the hotel that evening. And I remember us falling asleep because we were watching our show. We were watching, I think it was How to Get Away with Murder. We were watching. And I fell asleep, but he was up and he woke me up telling me that things are bad. He wants me to take him to the emergency room. And so, you know, you're getting up and then he started to cough. And when he started to cough, he was coughing blood. So then, I'm in panic mode, but rushing to get to the hospital to figure out what was wrong. And we were at the emergency room for 24 hours, not really having an answer as to what was going on. They were running tests, all of that. They mentioned to him about moving him onto the ward so that they could observe him. And he was like, well, yeah, but where is she staying? Threcio was always like, once she good, I'll be good. I remember being moved to the ward and falling asleep, but then being awoken. Shift had changed, and there was a nurse making rounds, and she was under the impression that she was supposed to do labs for everybody, and she wasn't supposed to do labs for Threcio, but she did, God thing again. And that's when they saw a huge discrepancy in the blood work from when he was admitted the 24 hours before. And they were like, yeah, this is a red flag. And that's when everything started to go off. And then they finally were like, well, one of the nodules on the lung had ruptured and he was bleeding internally. And they were like, it's crazy at this point. All of this is happening. There is a procedure that we could do, but it's only a 10% chance that it will work. So, the doctor was doing their doctor thing, and they informed us about what needed to be done. Told us that they would have to ventilate him and intubate him and all of that so that it could be done. And then they left us to ourselves. So this is the moment where we're like, listen, this is serious. What's going on? They're giving you a 10% chance to live. And I said to him in that moment, I don't know about you, but all we need is that 10%, And in that moment, we prayed and we were like, God, we don't trust you to work it out. Yes, the doctors are there, but you are the greatest physician. Now, this is a conversation I'm having with him. But when I finished talking to him, I'm on the phone, and at that point you're married and you're grown, but no, I need my mommy. I called my mommy and I was like, Mommy, this is what they're saying, and I don't know. I cried in that moment, and she encouraged me to just, it's gonna be okay. You're this far, as much as a mother could do, being that far away. But she was there that afternoon because, I need you, Mommy. So Mommy came. I remember calling up my friends for support, Charles and Kadeen, and they met me at the hospital, and so they came to do their procedure. We prayed. They wheeled him down. At that point, everybody is like, you need to eat, and he'll be okay. Focus on you, and you need to eat. And I complied because, of course, I'm waiting for them to do their thing. He's not at the room. I can go and get something to eat. I remember being in the hospital cafeteria, and I'm there in this moment, and I had chosen whatever I was going to eat. And then over the hospital loudspeaker, a code blue is announced. And they don't call code blue, but they don't call a name. But I knew it was him. And I dropped everything. And it was like in that moment, life was just... And the nurse came to me right after saying that, yes, there was a code blue, but they had been able to resuscitate him. They had worked on him. She talked about how it was so traumatic for them because he was a young person and having to go through that. But I was like, a weight had been lifted. He had went through the procedure. They were able to stop the bleeding, and he was okay. And so for the next few weeks, it was a matter of living in a hospital literally, because I wasn't leaving his side. I had agreed that no matter what, I would be there. So I would sleep at the hospital, get up, go to the hotel, take a shower. That was my life. I literally lived at that hospital for those 6 weeks. And he was on the ventilator, but they would do like a daily CPAP breathing where he would, because the goal was to take him off. But in their minds, I guess things had looked so bad that even though he did it and was able to show signs of breathing, they wouldn't take him off. And I remember one day just being frustrated. And the patient advocate was like, I know a doctor. There's a doctor that I know. And she was like, I think you guys would prefer him. It would work out better. I remember meeting him and just him listening. Like, that was so key and significant because everybody had an opinion, but he was listening. And I told him what my desires were. And he was a believer. So he understood that, listen, we trust in God, but understanding that. And I remember him telling me that, like, okay, Tanika, trust that God can, but understand that he will do. I will do all that I can in terms of what medicine will allow. And so we did some things and he listened and medicine. And I remember even going to the hospital pharmacy to get something that wasn't available on the ward, but all of that. We were able to, through listening and understanding, getting him off the ventilator literally the day before Tishel came. So we were away. But my mom, my sister brought her to visit. So, she's coming to see her daddy. And I remember the day before she was coming, that's when he was extubated. And I said to him, all of this drama for these 3 weeks, like, you could have just told me to bring Tishel and I would have had her hair, and you could have. So again, laughing up about that whole thing. And then during that time for me, it was amazing to hear the doctors say, and even he wasn't verbal, but I understood him. I knew what he wanted. I could, and that was we at that time we learned to speak without words, because if he would need something, he would be able to say this is what he needed. Or even when he was unconscious, I would be like, he needs this, he needs that. And that in itself. So Tisha came, she had that time. During that time, he was doing his physical therapy, occupational therapy, because being on the ventilator for so long, he had lost his ability to walk and all of that. So we were going through that whole relearning life, and celebrating the win, celebrating when he could have solid foods, forces. We were going through that and not imagining that. I know that I wasn't imagining that I would return home without him. So we did the Christmas thing in the hospital. And it was literally a few days after Christmas where things just started to take a turn for the worse. And and I remember just being there in that whole confusion, asking like, God, what is going on? What are you doing? And the lungs were affected, so he was having trouble breathing. And for me, it was that, listen, what are we going to do? What we need to be doing, whatever is required to save his life. And then the doctor reminded me that, remember that you said that you would trust that God would. And that was so hard to remember in that moment, because I was never ready to lose him. And but I remember he was tired. I saw him fighting. I saw him being tired. And I said to him, I see that you're tired. And I had prayed and I said, God, the load is heavy. Let me carry some of what he is carrying. And I remember saying to him, you're tired, and I understand if you have to go. And I don't know what would make me say that. And I guess being a wife and knowing what your husband would need. But I wasn't okay. His last night, I spent by his side, with all the the machine had been muted because it was, when the vital signs would change, it would, so, just so that I could get some rest. And just that morning, I saw him being weak, and I'm praying for strength, and God, this is what I want. But the human part of me saw him suffering, and I was like, okay, God, and yeah, he just passed peacefully. It was just him and I in a hospital room, no suffering, no pain. And that was, Threcio was gone. And what am I doing now? What am I doing next? What are we doing, I will just say, but for the grace of God, because it was the toughest time of my life, because through the cancer and the diagnosis, I had him to share that load with me. Now he's gone, and I am having to bear the burden of that loss on my own. And those were the hardest days of my life, just trying to figure out how to live without Threcio. I didn't know how. There was nothing that could prepare me, and I was angry. People through grief will tell you, oh, don't question God because God knows best. But God, and I had some serious conversations with God. This was your plan, like you allowed me to. But of course, that's where I found my healing, having those conversations with God, and ultimately understanding that, Threcio came, he lived, he fulfilled his purpose. God allowed me to be part of that journey in terms of helping him fulfill his purpose. So I felt blessed even being given that type of a mantle. And struggling through, don't question God, and having faith and being angry and God, how could you? And ultimately just being grounded in faith, I always just found my way back to God in terms of, well, never leaving, because God kept me, kept my mind when I didn't know how, when I slept and wake and just did the motherhood thing. The grace of God, because that is the only way I am able to explain how I kept that I didn't lose my mind. Because this is me at 26. I met Threcio at 16. So 10 years of my life. This is the man that I know, a life we've built, a daughter that we have, a marriage that and then he was just gone. And yeah, but he lived, and even in his suffering, my faith grew, because I saw God in the midst of, I saw God giving us more time, because he could have been gone so many times. I remember one Christmas or one Old Year's night during Old Year's night, we always kick it off in church, and again it was a regular day. We were doing errands around town, and he wasn't feeling so well, and we had gone to the doctor, but and then God again, my doctor, who is also my friend, I called her and I was like, things aren't so, and she walked during the day, but for whatever reason, it was at the time when they were transitioning to the new people's hospital, and she was working on night shift, and she was like, bring him. And that's the only reason he literally agreed to go to the hospital anyway, because it was somebody who he knew and trusted. He just was over the whole doctor's thing. And she said to me, if you didn't bring him when you did, he would have passed out at home. So it was that time, that was like a year before he passed, where his lung had collapsed and he wouldn't have been able to breathe on his own. And so through the grief, I saw God doing instrumental things to give us more time. And so I'm truly grateful for that, because there were times when he could have been gone. That time The time when the doctors gave us the 10% chance and God gave us 6 more, 10% chance that he won't live past 24 hours, and God gave us 6 weeks. So in the midst of, God still is, and so I'm grateful. It wasn't where I wasn't able to have that time to process and more. Like, I'm forever grateful for those last 6 weeks. It wasn't ideal in terms of where I wanted to be, but God knew what he needed to do, because even in that moment you're being visited, people are ministering to you, but you're ministering to them in the midst of. So it was about God and him being ultimately getting the glory from that our lives and the situation that we lived. And then God ultimately taking Threcio home, and then reminded me that we shouldn't live like those who have no hope, because one great morning I'll be able to see Threcio again. And so in the midst of that chaos, it was picking myself up and being a mother force and having to decide that Tisha was my priority, but also thinking about, well, Threcio would want you too. And so I just kept on going, and 10 years later, life has changed. But I truly feel blessed to have lived life, experienced that, and be a part of what God wanted to do in Threcio's life. I can't put it better than this. Romans 8:28. For we know that all things work together for good to them who love God and those who are called according to his purpose. In spite of the loss that I felt, Threcio died in Jesus. Threcio was a believer. And so at the end of the day, my mind is at peace knowing that. Because the truth of the matter is, Threcio was a great man. And he accomplished a lot in his life. And the legacy that he has lived is one that others aspire to be. But can you imagine that he lived a life and there was no God and there was no... It would be for nothing. And so God, through my grieving, reminded me that Threcio lived in him and he died in him. And so in spite of all that's going on and the chaos that would seem to be existent, well done, good and faithful servant. This life and my experience has taught me that there's no script on grieving. Life will be, you will be okay, and then things will change. And people think that grief looks like a straight line, but grief is all over, because I still grieve his loss. I still have those, God, well, what was really your intention? And so I'm able to see it in moments with people like you, who you're able to 10 years later come up and say, my life was changed because of, or he was instrumental in teaching me music. And so even though he is gone, his legacy lives on. And that is, it's a good thing. It inspires me to continue to live and make sure that my legacy is one like he left behind. Anything you undertake in life, just do it in God, knowing that all the things that you do, all that you aspire to be, you have to do it in Christ. You can have all the plans that you want, but ensure that you're living a life that pleases God. And so for me, that would be my advice. I know I didn't lose my mind in the midst of all of this, because I had God to hold on to. And so if nothing else from this story, I would want to encourage people to trust in God. You're never too young. Threcio died at 28. We have just the other day, I lost a student who was 16 years old. And so no, we never know our time. So the goal should be to live a life that pleases God, that this life prepares us for the afterlife, which is the life that, that matters most. Don't think that you have time. The time is now. You always think you have more time. And I am guilty for thinking that there was more time. And so my advice is to live in the moment, take the pictures, record the videos, because one day they'll be all that you have. but I'm grateful that I have them.